Welcome to another episode of Live with David Lewis. I am your host. I hope you all can hear me. Welcome to another show. Today is January 7th. I hope everybody had a happy and healthy holiday season. I want to welcome you all to 2022. It's going to be a fun year. We've got our struggles ahead of us, but we're going to do the best we can with everything, and I'm sure we're all going to succeed like we did last year. So where did we leave off? Well, we're in part 2 of a 3-part series on overcoming objections. Last time it was mid-December, we had a show and we talked about step number 1, which is the acknowledgement step. Now we're going to go into step number 2, which is the counter story. And this is a very important part of overcoming an objection. But let's recap a couple of things. First of all, why do salespeople fail at overcoming objections? And, there's a bunch of reasons. I've got them written down here. First of all, we have no process. We fail to have a process for overcoming objections. Most of us just wing it. We have no plan. We don't plan for objections. And to me, that is absolutely amazing because you only get 3 objections. When you sell a car, it's a price or payment objection, it's a trade objection, or it's I want to go home and think about it. How can we not be prepared? No preparation. We have a fear of rejection. We fear the rejection that we're going to get when we try to overcome an objection so we don't do a good job. We have a lack of confidence, a lack of certainty. But the number one reason why we fail at overcoming objections is because for most of us, it's just easier to lower the price. Now, I know that in today's environment, cars are selling for sticker plus, and I get that. And most times we're not negotiating price, but this is not going to continue. So now's a great time to be prepared. The secret every customer has that they won't tell you, and that is number 1, they want you to be a good negotiator. They want to negotiate, and they want you to be better than they are at negotiations. It makes the process go smoother. Now, let's not forget that everybody wants to get a good deal. We all want a good deal. You want a good deal selling the car, and I want a good deal buying a car. The definition of a great deal is you're happy with the profit you made, and I'm happy with the price that I paid. So think about this for a second. When it comes to CSI scores, who typically gives us a 10 on a CSI? Who gives us the best scores on CSIs? Well, it's the people that pay the most. And I can't tell you why. I have a thought reason why. And who gives you the lowest scores? Well, it's the people who paid the least. It's always the person that pays the least, that grinds out the deal that you didn't want to sell the car in the first place to, that becomes the biggest headache to you after the fact. So why do it? Why? Because we are trained by the manufacturers to sell numbers, volume, volume, volume. You don't see it. You see dealers all the time advertising, number 1 volume dealer. You don't see anyone advertising most profitable dealer. I don't want to be the number 1 volume dealer. Let the guy down the street be the number 1 volume dealer. I want to be the most profitable dealer. I want to make money. I come to work every day to make money. Now, if I can make money on selling 10 cars a month, 12 cars, 15 cars a month, it doesn't matter. I just want to make money. Sometimes you have to walk away from a deal. We've talked about that in the past. So there are some consequences now to a customer being better than you at the negotiating or the objection process. If they're better and stronger than you, well, you're going to have to lower your price of the car. The customer will be much better to endure that back and forth negotiations. And then if they do buy the car, the customer will believe that they paid too much money for the car. And that is not a good situation that we want to have. So what is the moral of our story? Well, the moral of our story is that it's in the client's best interest that you are better than they are at negotiating. So let's talk about the first step that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. And the first step in the objection process is the acknowledgement. Okay. The old school formula for overcoming objections is to repeat, isolate, and overcome. Well, why would you want to repeat somebody's objection? If somebody said to you the price is too high, why would you want to come back and say, okay, so what you're telling me is that our price is too high, or you're not giving me enough for my trade? Why would you want to repeat that to them? It doesn't make sense. Now you got to isolate it. Well, it's already been isolated. The price is too high. And then how do we overcome it? Well, the most popular way of overcoming it is, if I could, would you? If I could lower the price, would you buy it today? And that's not negotiating. That's just dropping your price, dropping your price, dropping your price until you get to the customer's switch point. Is this a formula for overcoming objections? Absolutely not. What is it? It's a formula for lowering the price. When people object, they're defensive. They're scared. Now, some people are trained to object. They want to negotiate no matter what. And again, as I've told you, some people you just don't want to sell a car to. I actually know somebody who loves to negotiate, and he's great at it, and he's a pain in the ass, and he's actually had people tell him, we don't want to sell you a car. This is not fun. You've heard me say this over and over again. Have fun in what you do. If you're having fun and the customer's having fun, you're going to sell lots of cars and make money. So we know the customer's scared. They came into our dealership. They're very defensive. We've talked about this over and over again. Your job as a salesperson is to lower those defensive postures throughout your sales process. Every step of the process is designed to lower those defenses. I've told you before, you're not going to build trust. You're not going to get rapport. Just get the customer to like you. You're going to lower those defenses. Focus on the basics. Get the customer to like you. Find a car they love. Let them want to do business at your dealership. You're going to be home free. Now, when you offer them the price, now comes the fear, the stress, the tension. They want to object. It's common nature. So, customer comes in real defensive. Your job is to lower that defensive posture. Get it down to a very low point. When you sit down at your desk and you start negotiating, it is going to come up just a little bit. That is natural. What you don't want to do is start here, get them to here at your desk, and they go back up to here. You can't sell me a car when I'm this defensive. It is impossible. So the customer objects. I showed with you last time. The first thing you want to do is acknowledge that objection. Customer states the payment's too high. Folks, I understand exactly where you're coming from. I'm just like you. When I set out to buy a high ticket item, I too set up a budget, and I too try to stay within that budget. And sometimes that can be very, very difficult, can't it? And they'll respond, yes, it is very difficult. That's an acknowledgement. Let the people know you heard them, you understood them. Show some empathy to the situation. Customer says, you're not good enough for my trade. I understand exactly where you're coming from. I'm just like you. When I too set out to buy a car and I too have a trade, I never feel like I'm getting what my trade's worth. And it can be very frustrating, can't it? Let the customer know you understand their situation, their point of view. You're going to release their defensive postures. Once you've done that, the next step is now to make them change their mind, to give them something to think about. That is why we do a counter story now. A counter story is going to be a story, a scenario, or a situation. It's again to get them to change their mind, to give them some thoughts. So for example, a customer says the payment's too high, and maybe we're off $30, $40. I understand exactly where you're coming from. I'm just like you. When I set out to buy a high ticket item, I too set up a budget, and I too try to stay within that budget. And sometimes it's very difficult, isn't it? Yes, it is. Hey, let me share a scenario with you. Have you ever been to a restaurant? You go, you have a wonderful meal, the bill comes, and let's say the meals come to $100, and you're going to leave a tip. And you're going to leave 20%. So that's a $20 tip. Well, you know what, folks? You're not thinking twice about that $20. It's an automatic thing for you. And you pay the tip, and you move on with your meal, and you move on with your evening, and you have a great meal. You've got to give people a reason to justify the increase in the money, something that's different, that makes them think. Because we all go out for dinner, we all leave tips, and we don't think twice about it. So why are we thinking twice about spending an extra $20 or $30 to get what we want to get? Another scenario, and it's funny, I heard this from a lady one time, and it was a great story she told me. She said that she does her acknowledgement. Customer says payment's too high, or, I understand exactly where you're coming from. I'm just like you. When I set out to buy a high ticket item, I too set up a budget, and I too try to stay within that budget, and it can be very difficult, can't it? Yes, it can. Hey, let me share a scenario with you. A couple of weeks ago, I was at the supermarket, and I bumped into a young lady that I sold a car to about 6 months ago. I walked up to her, asked her how she was doing, and she said, great. And I asked her how the car was. And she said, boy, did I make a mistake with that purchase. Do you remember when I came in, I actually wanted to buy a white Honda Accord, and I settled on a white Honda Civic? And she said, yes, of course. It was a budget issue. That Accord was about $30 more per month than you wanted to spend. And she said, no, I understand that. But I got to tell you something. About a month after I bought the Civic, my next door neighbor bought a new car. And you know what he bought? A white Honda Accord. And that's the car that I actually wanted. And every morning when I get up and I go to work and I leave and I drive by that Accord, I say, oh, I wish I had the Accord. Every time I come home, I say, oh, I see the Accord. I say, I wish I had the Accord. And then I realized that 4 or 5 months later, I'm going to get a pay raise anyways. And the extra $30 a month really wasn't that big of a deal. That's a counter story. It's giving people a reason to think about it. You can't say to people, if I could, would you? You can't attack them and say, well, it's only $30 a month. You got to tell them a story. You see, people love to hear stories. Now, there are two types of people who buy cars, okay? There's cars that fit into their budget, and there are people that fit their budget into the right car. The counter story is designed for that second person, to get the budget to fit into the right car. People, believe it or not, will pay more to get what they want to get. And that's logical. I think we're all like that. Now, is there a reality of how much more I'm going to spend? Of course there is. I'm not going to spend an extra $100 a month, but I don't think people are looking at cars that are $100 apart. So what does every salesperson have in common? Well, they've all sold the car to someone who has regretted their decision. I mean, we've all done that. We've all sold cars. We will have second thoughts. And we've all sold the car to someone who's happy that they made the decision that they made. And that's the important thing. So what do we know about adults? Well, adults gravitate to things that are familiar to them. That's why storytelling works. You should always tell stories. It can be a true story. It can be a made-up story. I don't think it really matters as long as it gets the point across to someone. It captures the buyer's attention. It establishes an emotional connection between the car and what they're getting. Look, at everybody that buys a car from you can afford an extra $20, $30, or $40 a month, $50 a month. You cannot convince me differently of that. Now, do I believe that some people are on fixed budgets? Absolutely. I think it's 3% of the American population. I think it's people that are usually elderly on a fixed government income. You get, Mr. and Mrs. Jones who come in, and between the two of them, they make $1,840 a month in Social Security. Yes. Is $20 or $30 going to mean a lot to them? Absolutely. But these aren't the people that we're talking about. Usually the people that want to negotiate are not those type of people, and they can afford it. I'll bet you most of those people have $100 in their pocket right now and can afford it. Some storytelling facts. Let me read what I've got here. People retain 70% of your message when it's in a story. That's a pretty big number. People retain 5% of the facts if it's a pitch. So if you're making a sales pitch, they're not retaining much of it. 22 times more likely to remember what's told in a story. That's a lot. And we're naturally drawn to stories as human beings. We like it. When you're out in a group and someone says, hey, I got a funny story to tell you, you'll notice everybody kind of listens and I want to hear the funny story. That's why stories are so important. Now, a couple of story key points here if you're going to tell stories. Make sure your story is well crafted, okay? That it connects and it visualizes what you're trying to get across. It must be engaging. You must be a good storyteller, and your story must be relevant to the situation. Don't tell me a story about saving $5 on something. Tell me a story that really relates to something. And that's very important. I could tell you years ago, I used to tell this great story, about a mortgage. I said, years ago when I was married and had kids and we wanted to buy a house, and we set up a budget. That's what people do. And the realtor called us up one day and said, hey, I found this great house, but it's a little bit more than you wanted to spend, but it's got some more features. Do you want to look at it? And my wife and I said, well, we don't have anything to lose. Might as well look at it. So we went and looked at it, and you know what? It was beautiful. It had an outdoor pool with a fenced-in patio. It had a fireplace, and it had a spare bedroom. But it was about $150 out of our budget. And we decided not to buy it. We ended up buying another house that was less money. I didn't have the fenced-in backyard with the pool, didn't have the fireplace, and didn't have the spare bedroom. But I didn't realize that in order to get to my new house, every day I had to go buy the old house. And it was horrible in the summertime. I'd have to roll the windows up because I didn't want to hear all the kids playing in the pool and having a great time. Or in the fall, seeing the smoke coming from the barbecue pit. Or in the winter time, seeing the fireplace. Or at Christmas time, seeing the extra cars in the driveway, knowing someone was staying in that spare bedroom. And I regretted it every time. And it was only $150. And then every time I'd go out for dinner, I wouldn't think twice about spending an extra $20 or $30 on a tip. Now, is that a true story? Well, I'm going to be honest with you. It's not a true story, but it makes logical sense and it makes people think. And you could say, hey, I know somebody and let me share a story they had. And that could be me. I could be the person that you know that you want to share that story about. Okay. When you're telling a story, you must be prepared. Don't wing it. Practice it. Be ready. Again, I told you earlier, this is what's amazing to me. There's only 3 objections you get 95% of the time: price or payment, trade, and I want to go home and think about it. Now, I know you get other ones mixed in there, but they are not the majority. They are the minority. You don't want to invent stories on the fly because you're going to get long-winded and it's going to be bad. And you got to practice your stories consistently. So step number one is acknowledge. Let's release those defensive postures. Let's get them down. Let's tell something inspiring to give somebody second thoughts about why they're making the decision that they made. And then next time, I'm going to share with you how to do what we call a seek acknowledgement. And then let's close the deal. Let's sell the car for all the money every single time. Now, I see your questions are starting to pop in. Let me just give you a couple final thoughts. I'll take your questions and we'll call it a day. I would always have 2 or 3 stories ready. Now, me personally, price and payment is a big one. So I have 2 kind of stories I use. I would have one good story for my trade and another for the I want to go home and think about it. You don't always have to use the story as a bad ending. It can be a good ending. It can be a positive ending. It can be that, thank God I made the right decision had I not done differently. When you tell your story, tell it with conviction. And that's going to come from practicing it and being prepared. There's nothing better than preparation. I always joke about this. If we in the car business train like we were professional athletes, we'd be phenomenal at what we do. And that's the amazing part. When you tell your story, use eye contact. If there's multiple people sitting there, look at multiple people and make sure they're engaged in the story. Get to the point of your story. I have a habit sometimes I'll linger on, I'll keep telling, adding to my story. And you're going to have that happen. You're going to start with a story on day 1. And by day 60, you'll have massaged that story with other thoughts in it. Don't get too long. Get to the point of your story. A lot of times you might not be positive to use you as the main character. It could be less believable. You can always say, I know somebody or somebody shared this with me. And again, I said this earlier, make sure your story is relevant. If it's not relevant, it's not going to go anywhere. And my final thought is this: practice, 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 practice. Be prepared. You will feel so good about yourself when somebody states an objection and you don't have to think twice. I know I don't. So with that said, I got a bunch of questions popping in here. Let me get to a couple of them real quick. All right, what's the first one here? Mel, what if the counter story doesn't work? What do I do then? Well, Mel, keep in mind, you can always go back to your old school tactics. We can always lower the price. But a lot of times what you're going to find is sometimes the story creates dialogue and it gets people talking. If I've got to negotiate price, I still want to hold as much as I can. I believe this: old school method, big discounts. This method, smaller discounts. So you still might be lowering the price. You might just not be lowering it as much. So your counter story did work. All right, Team Chevrolet. What if I don't have a counter story or one that I can? Is it okay to make one up? Yes, I told you that earlier. You must have, I think that came in. Make up a story. Come up with a story. Now, be careful. Don't let everybody in the dealership use the same story, because then if somebody hears somebody else using the same story, you could get yourself into a pickle. That's again why it's important to say, hey, I knew somebody or we knew somebody. All right, Cammie wants to know, does the counter story only apply to price or payment objections? No, it applies to everything. Now, Cammie, let me share this with you. And I think we've done this on a previous show. If not, we'll do it on a future show. It's called an objection conversion. And what I'm going to share with you real quickly is a very, very, very advanced technique. You see, I'm only good at 2 objections. I only need 2 objections: price and trade. Everything else I convert. So when somebody says to me, well, I want to go home and think about it, my conversion, I would say to them, gee, that's surprising. The F-150 pickup truck is a very, very popular truck. Most people that do look at it do end up purchasing it. But I'll tell you what I found. Of the few who don't, most want to go home and just think about the money. I mean, we are talking about spending $500 a month for the next 72 months. It's a lot of money. Would you say that's one of the things you want to go home and consider? That is called an objection conversion. And what I've done is I've given people an out. People that get scared and defensive want an out. So now I've given them an out. Most people say, oh yeah, we do want to think about the $500. Perfect. I know exactly where you're coming from. I'm just like you. When I set out to buy a high ticket item, I too set up a budget and I too try to stay within that budget. And it can be very difficult, can't it? And then I go right into my counter story. You see, I'm not overcoming. I want to go home and think about it. I'm now overcoming the price objection, which I planted in their mind. They gravitated to, and now I can overcome that objection. All right, 2 more here. Nick, do you favor going negative or positive in the story? Meaning, do you prefer to have a happy ending or a sad ending to your story? It doesn't matter whether it's a positive ending, a sad ending, as long as it gets people to think. That's the most important thing, that it gets them to think. That's all I want to do. All right, 1 more. Shelley, what if I'm just not a good storyteller? Should I do it anyways, or will this actually hurt my chances to close the sale? Shelley, you're a car salesperson. You are a good storyteller. You have learned how to make presentations and demonstrations. We've taught you how to do walk-around presentations. You can do this. Come up with a story. Write your story out. Take a day, write it out. Every 10 minutes or every hour, look at your story again. Massage your story. Look at it over the next week or 2. Massage it. Practice it. Learn it. Shelley, you can do this. Everybody can do this. This is not very difficult. So with that said, again, I want to wish everybody a happy new year. I hope you're all being well and being safe. I'll see you in a couple of weeks. In a couple of weeks, we're going to do part 4. We're going to tie this all in a bow, because now we've got the customer's defensive down. We've got them rethinking their thoughts. Now what we got to do is now we have to close the deal. And that's what it's all about, closing the deal. So with that said, wish you all best. Good luck, everyone. And I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Bye-bye.